We can't really do a full review of this movie because it would just sound like we're reviewing the other two. We did it. We watched 50 Shades Freed.
Yes.
Let's break this down in reasons to see and reasons not to see this movie, people. Let's hop right into it. No beating around the bush.
The CGI bush, as per the first film. You remember that saga?
Nope. Reason to see number one. Dakota Johnson is occasionally good. I think the biggest surprise of this film, while there are definite scenes when Dakota Johnson is pretty flat, there's an occasional moment or two, it's really intermittent, where I would look over to my girlfriend and be like, whoa, she does a really good job in this scene.
Yeah.
She's really emotional here, and I believe the shit out of her right now.
I guess I would say that there are only a handful of moments in which she truly shines out. However, I will say that for me anyway, she is the most watchable thing about this movie especially, but kind of the past three. There's something about her weird, quirky portrayal of this character that just works for me. I don't know why.
No, well, I thought that in terms of when she had actual scenes to do in this movie. It's like the conversational parts where she's just having a conversation, I don't believe her, but when she has like an emotional thing to do, I really buy her. She even has a really good confrontation moment in this movie.
Yeah, that moment took me completely by surprise, and it's like the one moment that randomly crests into actual relationship drama, the likes of which you wish we could have seen for so much of the rest of the series. I guess what works for me about her is that when it's not particularly good, she seems to have just the right pitch. She seems to get what she's doing.
Sure.
I think. Reason to see number two, some of the sex.
Well,
yeah.
Some of it's alright. Some of it's whatever.
You know.
There are certain scenes where you're like, that was kind of hot. Let's move on to the reasons not to see. Reasons not to see number one. Bad performances. Alright, so I didn't take the time to go on IMDb and respect the shit out of all these actors by looking up all their names and stuff. But here's what I can tell you. Jamie Dornan does not get any better. He is just as flat as ever. In fact, he seems like he cares even less this time around. I feel like 50 Shades Grey, he sucked. 50 Shades Darker, he tried. 50 Shades Freed, there's no point. That's
kind of
the progression of
Split
everything.
the difference between the first two, and you got number three.
And there's like other characters in here who are just not as good as Jamie Dornan. A lot of it, yeah, sure, falls on the writing of them, but it just really seems like the only one who really cared to show up was occasionally Dakota Johnson. Probably because she felt like she was going out with a bang.
Because of the sex, of which there is a little bit in this movie. Reason not to see number two. The lack of sex.
I can't tell you how many scenes there were in this movie. I could at least think of three, but there's so much of this movie. When it starts getting hot, it cuts. Or when you think they're about to do it, they don't.
Yeah, a lot of the dramatic tension, one way or the other, always kind of involves them wanting to and attempting sex, and then either a relationship dispute or some kind of weird outside force getting in the way.
Yeah.
So this is a big tease of a movie a lot of the time.
It really is just teasing. I mean, when the sex is there, it's okay. It was weird because the first 50 Shades movie, I watched it, and you could make this argument for the other ones, but specifically this one. Whenever there was a sex scene, I was like, there's really no point for this scene at all. At least the first two are like about this is why they're so drawn to each other or whatever. I don't know. They're already married and when they're having sex, I'm like, this does nothing for the movie. So I don't even feel like this is hot. I'm just aware of these actors doing this.
We're just rechecking in on their passion.
Just
Remember the
same
passion.
actors having sex.
Guys, the passion.
It's no different. They don't do any experiments.
If you're not used to seeing a lot of sex, you know, it'll probably turn you on.
The most disappointing part was the marketing of this says don't miss the climax. And then there's a sex scene coming up where I'm like, this must be the thing they're saying not to miss. And then it cuts to black.
Yeah, right. Oh boy. This movie's weird in that department too. I feel like they missed a big opportunity to really embrace sex instead of just kind of showing you a random scene once in a while that shows just a little bit more than you're used to seeing.
Because I'll admit, the first one I didn't care for the sex in there. This one I really don't give a shit about. At least in 50 Shades Darker, there were sex scenes and their chemistry where I was like, man, it's pretty hot actually what they were doing.
I thought a couple of these sex scenes were titillating and whatnot as parts of a coherent movie, not so much.
No, I just laughed. Reason not to see number three, the writing and directing, the whole movie.
This film, I feel like, was like a music video based on just a stack of different catalogs. Because so much of this movie is just them going to different other nice rich people places and wearing different other nice outfits.
It's exactly the same. We can't really do a full review of this movie because it would just sound like we're reviewing the other two, honestly.
It's just them trying to go out and live their life and whatever, and then getting interrupted by like the occasional murder attempt and then just drama between them.
I mean, that's one thing I'll kind of give this movie credit for, is that the first two had like these random parts where like they're trying to be a thriller about it. And I'll admit, in the finale of this film, it got randomly intense. I wasn't like gripped by it, but I was pulled in enough to be like, this is pretty intense shit, actually, here.
I didn't love that storyline, but I will say it was more effective than
it added some intensity to it.
And it allowed Anastasia to become a stunt driver out of nowhere.
Yeah. They have like 3 plots in this movie. They got married, Anastasia wants to have a kid.
And her job. There's like a subplot where she's like really trying to be professional at work and stuff.
Yeah. And then there's this other plot about the guy from 50 Shades Darker who's like stalking Anastasia, or is he stalking Christian now? Which one is it?
This goes back to the beginning in this movie, all right?
The beginning of the
Destiny.
second one. So when the movie's unfolding, the stalker plot becomes a little more intriguing. That's the part that adds some intensity to it. The other plot lines are so dull. It does all the same exact shit that the first two did, where it keeps seeming like it's gonna go somewhere, but it doesn't. That's like the whole thing. At least in the finale, it kind of wraps up the plot lines, where I feel like the first two kind of just end and you're like, what the hell? It's just them hanging out. And this movie especially, the first hour and 20 minutes of this hour and 40-minute movie is them just kicking it for most of it.
There are a couple distinct arcs about this movie, but nothing really that gives you a catharsis or an impact, or that it really feels like it built to something like it technically did. They get over a couple issues and avoid being killed.
What this movie does is what the other ones do, is they set up conflicts. Christian disrupts Anastasia at work because she won't change her email to Anastasia Gray, and it seems like, is Christian gonna go back to who he was? Are they gonna have problems?
Issues.
And then there's this real estate lady who's all over Christian, and then might be into Christian's brother.
The trailer about like, you call me Mrs. Gray.
Yeah, and they're really setting that up to be something. That's a lot of this movie, is conflicts are introduced, but they don't get resolved or acknowledged ever again, and don't ultimately play into the rest of the film.
And I get the way that life works like that, but it's just not satisfying here. They set up a couple different storylines where you're like, whoa, is this kind of significant character like cheating or something? And then they just never bring it back.
Just drop it.
They just rush right past stuff. And
there's stuff where I was like joking in the theater going, oh shit, and then nothing pans out. Like, they just don't bother to acknowledge stuff. They just drop so much in here. And the things that they kept the focus on with the stalker story and the pregnancy kind of become interesting. And that's mainly because of Dakota Johnson's performance.
And they would have been more interesting in a better written movie that actually bothered to use them for anything more than just basic plot conflicts, you know?
So yeah, I mean, the sex ain't exciting in this film. The plot itself is more dull than it's ever been. It's better than 50 Shades of Grey.
Depends on your threshold.
Yeah, it was weird because I saw 50 Shades Darker and I was like, you know what? I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun and I thought they knew what they were doing. This one went right back to 50 Shades of Grey for me. At least 50 Shades of Grey had enticing sex scenes to some degree. Here, you're like, they don't even care about the sex anymore. They don't even do anything kinky or new in this. They do stuff where I'm like, what makes it kinky is the fact that they have actors doing this in a big movie. But when you think about the actual sex acts they're doing, it's not...
It's nothing
crazy. Special.
It's like, oh my god, it's kind of crazy that we see like simulated fellatio on screen for a prolonged amount of time, but at the same time, you're like, it's really not that crazy.
But if I heard
sexual
of
spectrum.
people doing
it's
that,
a bondage story. There's a whole panoramic rabbit hole to go down with the BDSM.
The one thing
world,
you had to do with this movie, if anything else fails, is make the sex really cool and enticing.
Your job is to be taboo, but that's the problem: is you can't appeal to everybody. And you can't keep everybody if you get too taboo.
They cut back on sex. They try enhancing plot and character stuff. Not really, but you could tell they're trying.
This is like a relationship Fast and the Furious movie. It's like that's the level everything's on, but it's just them trying to have a honeymoon and get through some issues.
Ultimately, in the end, I really walked away feeling like this movie had the potential, this franchise had the potential to be a psychological study of an abusive dominant and a codependent victim, Anastasia. aphasia, and
switch.
also it could have been a story with the theme of lust versus love, and
Yeah.
like just because you're insanely attracted and love sex, does that really mean you love? It's none of that. It's really just a super dull.
At least
There's a
the
lot of
previous one
stupid-
had soul, you know?
The previous one seemed like it was more aware of what this was.
There are definitely times I laughed unintentionally, and a couple times where an intentional joke worked too.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that.
Ultimately, if I were to rate this movie, I'd say it's a flaccid experience.
Oh, whiskey dick.
All right, Reject Nation, did you feel satisfied after this climax?
Yeah, how are you dealing with the afterglow?
Do you regret paying to watch this on IMAX? Subscribe. Click that notification bell. Follow us on the Stardust app. And check out our Patreon. Become a Patronject today. A lot of exclusive perks over there and videos.
And if you did watch it on IMAX, just please give us a very detailed description of what that was like.
Sorry, I was thinking about the movie again.
Oh, really?